Hello, welcome to Inspiring Women with ADHD. I am Renee Allen, the host of this podcast, and my voice is a little hoarse today. I've had a cold for a couple days, but it's showing up in my voice. So we're just going to go with it today and see how it goes. Today, I'm talking about obsessive compulsive behaviors. You may have some, or you might feel like you have some, but you might learn more about what obsessive compulsive behaviors mean and find out that maybe you just have another aspect of ADHD and it's not related to OCD at all or OCPD. So there are two disorders that involve obsessive compulsive behavior. And I had never heard of OCPD until I was talking to my psychiatrist about my diagnosis with ADHD and was asking him about obsessive compulsive behaviors or OCD and if it overlaps with ADHD, because there are other things like RSD, rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria. I think when I mentioned it earlier on the podcast, like a few months ago, I might have said disorder, but it's dysphoria. But I know I have to think about it. RSD is a disorder that is common or happens for a lot of people with ADHD. And so I wondered if it was the same thing for OCD. And he said, actually, it's more commonly associated with OCPD. And I thought, I don't even know what that is. So I looked into it a little bit, and I started looking into it more because as I evaluate my own ADHD symptoms and see patterns in my family history, my dad in particular, because he has a lot of obsessive behaviors, I wondered, well, what does this mean? And do we fit in the category of a disorder, or is it just part of ADHD? And if so, why is it a part of it? Is it part of the hyperactive component? Is it part of the inattentive component? And it just makes me very curious. So I'm going to explore that with you. And as I do, you can look at your own behaviors. And if you see any correlation or even in your family history, because ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder. It is highly hereditary, meaning that it's highly likely, not always, but it's highly likely that if you have it, one of your children has it, or more than one of your children, or one or both of your parents have it. So it's kind of interesting to think about, especially if you have that curious component, that curiosity component that goes along with ADHD. So let's start with just talking about OCD, because that's the one that we know a little more about or we hear a little more about. And we often hear people say, I'm so OCD. I am so OCD about that. And it's become more slang, I guess, in the way people describe themselves, but they're not actually saying they have the disorder. So let's see what they are. And I am not an expert on what personality disorders are, but I am familiar with a few of them just because of different people that I know in my life that I've explored that a little more just to understand them better. So to start off with, OCD is something that could show up in your life, even if you have ADHD. And OCPD is a personality disorder. And I've got to tell you, my hesitancy as I start talking about these is to not get more curious about what I don't know while I'm talking to you, because that's my tendency, is to have that curiosity to just go running off like a freight train. And then I want to start looking into more. And I need to just stay focused here, focused, which is already telling me that's part of attention deficit, isn't it? Or it's part of the hyperactivity, the impulsiveness of wanting to find out right now. But let's go back to OCD. So OCD is a mental illness, and it is associated with anxiety. The person who has OCD often has recurrent, intrusive, unwanted, persistent thoughts and repetitive behaviors that go along with those thoughts. And this creates anxiety sometimes behaviors are supposed to feel like they're calming that anxiety, but it may just compound it. And I'm not an expert on this, but that's one thing that the psychiatrist told me is OCD has a lot to do with the behaviors that you do to deal with the thoughts that you're having, whereas OCPD doesn't have those behaviors. There are some other differences, but people with OCD have a lot of anxiety along with this. And I listened to a podcast once where someone described, you might think, oh, I have OCD because I've been thinking about this so much, these intrusive thoughts, or this is bugging me, or I can't let go of it. And he said that the difference is we might have, I'm just saying we, if I'm somebody without OCD, I might have those thoughts for a little while, and then I'm able to make sense of them and get myself to let go of that or do something to make it so that's not a problem. Whereas somebody with OCD can't. It could go on for hours, it could go on for days, and they can't shake it. And it causes a ton of anxiety for them. And then they do things like the one that we know about, I think we think about often, they display in shows and things like that, TV shows or movies, is somebody who's obsessive about cleanliness. I can't get that word out. And they might wash their hands so many times over and over and over and over and over to deal with that. So what's interesting about OCD is people with OCD know that their thoughts aren't rational. They know it's not rational, and they try to do something to help it go away or to help deal with it, to help cope with it. But they have an awareness to some degree that their thoughts are beyond, but they're trying to find a way to deal with it to lessen the anxiety. Whereas OCPD, that awareness isn't there. So a person with OCPD creates a routine or a sense of order in their lives, and they're not flexible about it. They find a way that things need to be done. They have a desire for control in their relationships, in their environment. They have a hard time empathizing with others because they're trying to maintain this control, and they think that this sense of order is more important than the relationships. They'll give that priority. And they have this need for perfection. Maybe not in every single area of their life, but for these areas for which they need control, they have that need for perfection. And I used to hear about people who are anal, someone who's an anal personality type, who is anal retentive, and that's somebody who has to have something done a certain way. And from what I've read, they are very, very similar. The difference is it becomes a disorder, a personality disorder. It's diagnosed as that if it's interfering with their daily life. If it's more of a personality quirk, someone might say, oh, you're anal about that. And they have these needs to have everything in order, but they're still able to have these relationships. They're still able to function. They're still able to have stable relationships, doesn't interfere with their work, their home life. And the same could be said for ADHD, at least what I've read about the diagnosis is there are the symptoms that show up. They have to have a certain amount of symptoms on each list of whether it's the attention deficit or the hyperactive. But the psychiatrist is also looking to see, has this caused problems, or is it causing problems in your daily life? And if it is, or if they can see that it is, and you may not know that it is, then that's where it becomes a disorder, because it's causing disorder in your life, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I'm just trying to make sense of the wording here. So, yeah, so somebody who's anal about things, or sometimes they say type A, I don't know if that's the same thing. Those are a lot of things that go along with ADHD for sure. If you have that part of you wanting things to be orderly, you could have your shirts organized by color in your closet. And maybe that's because we have a need for order when our minds can get so cluttered. I think that's what it's like for me anyway. But you can find a lot of those perfectionistic behaviors that you have, whether it's perfectionism, whether it's the anal retentiveness, or going farther with it, it could be the OCPD. And I find that OCPD quite fascinating. One, because it's newer to me, and two, because I'm pretty sure my dad fits in that category. And I know we're not supposed to diagnose people, but I think if you're in your own family or if you're in a relationship with somebody and you're trying to figure out why they behave like they do and how to interact with them, or maybe why their brain's doing what it's doing, I think it can be helpful. I doubt he would ever go to someone to find out if he had it, but it's helpful for me to look into that and maybe talk to my mom about it or something, or my brothers, because sometimes that can, again, just help make sense of things when it does interfere with relationships or the ability to be sane in the situation at times. So back to OCPD and the traits that person might have. The person is very, very sure that their reason for doing something is right. There is a need for it, and it needs to be done that way. They're not seeing their thoughts or behavior as a problem, like the person with OCD might be aware of. This isn't rational, but I can't stop it. And I've had those obsessive thoughts before where they're not rational, but you can kind of convince yourself they are. But you look around and nobody else has a problem with it. An example is, and I'm not saying I have OCD, I don't think I do. I don't have to do things, the behavioral, the actions to deal with it. But an example is that we used to go to a lot of bonfires. We lived by the beach in Santa Cruz, and we would go to bonfires with friends. And one night we were at a bonfire, and I don't know why there was cardboard around. I think because whoever started the bonfire brought some cardboard, brought a lot of wood. And at the time, that bonfire was close to the edge of the beach. Sometimes there was a higher tide and it needed to be up higher. It was close to the edge of the beach. And there were some young kids there, some boys that were sons of my friend, who thought it was really fun to take the cardboard and throw it in the fire. And I think this was even a second fire. I think they made a smaller fire for the kids, the teenagers, and a bigger fire for the adults. So there weren't a lot of adults over by that fire. But these boys kept taking the cardboard and they would throw it in the fire, which might not seem like a big deal. But what would happen is it would make really big papery ashes, like as big as your hand, and they'd go floating up in the sky with the smoke, and the wind would blow it toward these people's houses, and they had roofs and things like that. And I thought, what if that catches someone's house on fire? That's not a smart thing to do, because sometimes there'd be a little red on the ash, the little ember or something. So I said to the boys, don't throw the cardboard in the fire. That could cause a fire to these houses are really close by. And so they walked away for a few minutes, but they went back and were doing it again, kind of, giggling and stuff like that. And I grew up with 4 brothers, and I hated it when adults would yell at my brothers. I think that boys get in trouble a lot when they're just having fun, and especially when they're hyperactive. One of my brothers, whoops, I just slid off my chair. One of my brothers was definitely hyperactive. That's what we said. We didn't know ADHD. He was definitely hyperactive and got in trouble a lot at school and stuff. But he was a happy, happy kid and sweet, and he hated school teachers because they didn't understand him, even in through high school. And he's the most mild-mannered person now. He's so kind and sweet. But when he looks back at school and tells his stories, I mean, it's a miracle he didn't turn another way into a bad direction, because he had a hard experience there. But anyway, so I've always had a compassion for boys, for brothers. And so I didn't want to bug these boys. I didn't want to get in the way of parenting of my friend. But I said something to the other adults, and they kind of said, oh, yeah, and stuff. So I was kind of, just getting really upset inside, worried about this fire that may or may not happen. And a funny thing happened. One of my friends whose son has autism, at that time they said he had Asperger's, and now I don't know if they use that term anymore, but he he's functioning for sure, but he also was definitely on the spectrum to a big degree. And he walked over to me and his shoulders were up to his ears. And as a yoga teacher, I know that the tension that's in somebody's body when that's happening. And he was like, they just keep playing in that fire. And I said, Riley, I know. And it's driving me crazy too. And I said, we need to just walk away. There's nothing we can do about it. We need to just walk away. This isn't our business. And it wasn't causing a fire. And maybe it wasn't as big of a danger as we thought. And I could look around. So I had some awareness to the point where I could look around and see that the other adults could see it and weren't that worried. And sure, some people could be like that and then a big fire could happen. But there's fog on the beach. It's a moist area. Maybe they knew that roof wasn't a shingle roof. Who knows? Who knows? But I saw myself relating very well with Riley that day. And I looked at it as, I think that I worry about a lot of these things because I grew up with my dad worrying about everything. He always talked about all the things that could go wrong and would go wrong and needed to control the environment because of that. Our friends would go swimming at a creek or a river. We couldn't do that because he knew all the things that could happen, how we could break our neck and drown and all those things. We couldn't do any of that because he knew what could happen. So he needed to control that environment. And even when I was in high school and I was driving, I lived in a really small town, 3,500 people or something. And so we had fun in our town, but there wasn't a lot to do. And we would drive to the bigger town where there was a movie theater and a Taco Bell. And I made friends in the bigger town, which is so funny. Now I go to the bigger town. It wasn't that big, but it seemed big to us. Maybe it was twice as big. I don't know. I go to it now and I'm just like, this was not a big town. But anyway, I would say to my dad, can I drive to Ukiah tonight and see my friends? And he'd say, oh, you don't want to do that. You'd be so much safer being at home, which is probably true. I don't think any natural disaster was going to get me at home, but I think I need to live my life, But I grew up with my dad always telling me the things that could go wrong. And my kids could see it in me. They could see, yeah, you have a little bit of grandpa in me. And then my brothers, I was really surprised because they're all really mellow compared to me. And my brother, who had ADHD when he was younger, he's super mellow now. I think he let go of his hyperactive component, although his wife tells me she's not convinced. But they all say that they can see my dad's behaviors of that, noticing, go lock all the doors, make sure this, I got to get out of bed because I'm not sure if I lock the door, that kind of thing. They can see that. So I just thought, because I didn't understand the likelihood of anything mental, maybe not everything mental, but things being passed down in the mental health world. I didn't know anything about it actually. And so I just thought it was the nurture more than the nature, being exposed to him saying that all the time. It made me start to see it. But learning now about obsessive compulsive behavior, I can see that I don't have it because I have an awareness that I'm having some irrationality to go with that, whereas my dad doesn't. And I don't want to out, him in any way. Anybody who knows him knows this about him. But if you go to his house and want to use the washer and dryer, he didn't do this when I was growing up, but he wasn't home all the time during the day. He worked very long hours. But if you go to his house now and you want to use the washer and dryer to do some laundry, he'll tell you how to turn the button or it could ruin something, and how to make sure that you don't put too many clothes in or it'll ruin that. And there's some truth to overloading a top loader washing machine. There's some truth to some of the things that he says. I have overloaded and caused problems in a washing machine before in college. But he takes it to a degree and he doesn't see any irrationality with it. And he doesn't weigh that against the discomfort that it causes or the problems that it causes with the relationships of the people in his lives. And he has really good relationships with people. But at times that this is really heightened, it does cause problems. So So that's just something to note. If you have some of these thoughts and you're thinking, oh my goodness, maybe I do have OCPD because I want to have some order. I don't want someone to come in and mess up what I just created. And there's a reason for that. Or I don't want anybody to load the dishwasher because I need it loaded this way, or the water won't come up in it. My dad does that too. But I also knew that. And I am aware that I need to let go of that. And I see my side of it more in the perfectionism. I've never really thought of the anal retentive because I didn't understand that word. But the perfectionism, I see it more in the perfectionism or the just wanting, a little bit of control. But if you don't have the awareness and you can't see that it's not my way is the right way and everyone needs to do this, and I'm not budging, that kind of situation. So if you start to think that, and maybe we do, that's why they have this in articles and information about OCPD. If you start to think, well, maybe this person is a narcissist. And I've actually heard someone say that about my dad before. And I thought, no, he's not a narcissist, thinking I need it to be done this way. I never thought for a second that he was. So this is what the medical profession says in identifying or determining if someone has OCPD or narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder. Someone who is a narcissist or has narcissistic personality disorder has an exaggerated sense that they are grand, that sense of grandeur. I am the best. I should receive constant praise and attention. My dad's nothing like that. So just thinking that you're right doesn't mean you're a narcissist. It might just be that you believe that you're right and you don't do well mentally not sticking to that. And when other people are in your environment, you would want it to be that way. So these are a list of primary symptoms for OCPD. One symptom is feeling anger or anxiety or hostility toward other people that disrupt the rigidity or the perfectionism or the structure that they have. So if someone's coming in and they're not doing what they've asked them to do to maintain that, then they're going to get upset with them. They won't be able to control that as easily, whether they're acting on their anger or they're just feeling the anger. That anger, those anger issues can be a big part of OCPD. And all of these emotional tendencies, like being controlling or prone to anger, they're just possibilities. They're tendencies for people with OCPD. So it doesn't mean that they all have all these aspects. Just like with ADHD, we know that some people can have a huge problem with being able to focus where somebody else hyperfocus is their mainstream and they can focus on anything or hyperfocus. There are people like that, especially if they just have the hyperactive component and not the attention deficit component. It's interesting because I was just on Reddit the other day. There's an ADHD women's group, and someone was asking, what is the one symptom that a lot of people with ADHD have and you've never had? And it was kind of fascinating. I didn't have time to look at it very deeply, but I think there are symptoms that each of us can look at it and think, I don't have a problem with that. Or maybe not. Maybe you have all of them. We're all so different. Some other symptoms, and I've kind of mentioned the adherence to rules. It needs to be a certain way. They're not flexible about it. They create order in their lives, which isn't a bad thing, right? Desire to control their relationships, difficulty empathizing with others. And obviously I'm just basing this off of one person, but I would say it depends on the situation. Maybe for some of them, maybe they can empathize with others when it's not relating to an environment that they need to control. But if it is an environment they need to control, they need that person too. And empathy is an interesting thing because maybe a psychiatrist would say you either have the ability to empathize or you don't. But I think it can be situational, especially if you have something blocking your mind to think this is right and this is what I need to do. And if that's not a piece of what your thought process is, then you could understand somebody. because it goes along with what you think is okay. I don't know. But another symptom could be just dedication to what they're doing, need for perfection. But people can be perfectionistic without having OCPD. So this is just one of the symptoms and problems with self-identity, self-direction. I don't really see that with the person that I know that I think has this trouble giving up control or delegating tasks. And that can be a part of perfectionism too. I talked about perfectionism, 2 episodes ago? And that's how it can show up, and that's how it can interfere with relationships, is when we do delegate, but only let them do it if they do it our way. And unless we're paying someone to do it, we really shouldn't do that. And even if we are paying someone to do it, I mean, I've never been a manager or a boss, but someone else's way could be better. They could be better. I've mostly talked about OCPD here just because I think it might be new to you, and it was new to me, and because the psychiatrist said it is more likely to be related or something that somebody with ADHD would have instead of OCD. And so I thought that might be interesting to you in case this is something that you have or somebody you know. A few differences, though, back to OCD, is when you have OCD, they say it's a true obsession. You are driven by an obsession or a compulsion, which is interesting because hyperactiveness, I think, has a compulsion to do something, that impulse control. I don't know. Maybe I don't know enough about compulsions. Oh. Okay. Well, I'm just going to keep this rolling here, even though I'm kind of talking to myself, because instead of deleting that part, because I think it is interesting to learn. I didn't know what a compulsion is, and I'm reading right now that a compulsion isn't just an impulse to do something. It's an irrational behavior performed repeatedly. So if I feel like I have a compulsion, or I'm compulsed, is that a word? To make a Google Doc. And that's one of my hyper-focused things, my need to organize information in my mind. I'll make a Google Doc and write down all the information that I can find with something that I'm curious about. Like all the houses that I've lived in since I was born, I have a memory of what grade I was in when I was in one house or another, but some of them are fuzzy. So I asked my mom if she could write down what she knew about all the houses we lived in. And she does family history, so she had a kind of more of a story, but it had all the dates in it that she sent to me. And I made a Google Doc that showed me when I was born in this hospital, I lived in this house for so long. And then our family moved to this house, and I write down the addresses. Sometimes I look them up on Zillow. I really hyper-focus with it, but it's fun. And I don't keep that all in my brain. And then when I'm curious about it, in 6th grade, did we live on that house on Magnolia or did we live in the house on Bonnie Lane? I can go look it up and I can find that information. That's not a compulsion because it's not an irrational behavior. I am performing it repeatedly when I do this, but I don't think it's irrational to want to have information at my fingertips. So that's interesting to know that a compulsion isn't what I thought it was. And an obsession is an irrational thought or idea that continually repeats. And we might have obsessive thoughts at times, especially if you have the rejection sensitivity dysphoria. That might be a thought that you have. That person doesn't like me. That person doesn't like me. And it's not rational. It's not accurate. And you have a hard time letting go of it. And so you might have some obsessions for sure. I think we do with ADHD, but that doesn't mean that we have OCD. OCD has true obsessions and or true compulsions. OCPD does not have obsessions, or they're not driven by obsessions or compulsions. I think they must be driven on just a desire to have control. I wonder if that's it. Yeah, I'm still learning here too. And then OCPD, the people do not have irrational repeated behaviors. They don't have uncontrollable thoughts. They might have rigid behaviors, certain structure that they have to have, certain rules, certain procedures, but they don't have the thoughts that are overwhelming that are causing them to do this. And that's just really interesting because I think it starts with a thought, just going back to my dad. And I'm sure someone out there in the in the mental health world will criticize me for basing this all on one person. That's anecdotal, and I understand that. But it's also helping me understand if he has thoughts, because I don't think he's OCD. If he has thoughts, although he's been accused of having OCD and being a control freak by different people, usually people who aren't as kind. But anyway, what are the thoughts that are leading him to have those behaviors, to have that need for that control? I think the difference is that those thoughts aren't there for very long. He might have the thought of, if my child goes swimming in the creek, she's going to jump off the rock and break her neck. He might have that thought, but it's not causing a problem for him because he finds a rule, he finds a method, and those thoughts aren't in his head. And he's actually told me that before. I've said to him, Dad, you worry about everything. We've always accused him of worrying. You worry too much. You worry about everything. And his answer is, no, I don't. I don't worry because I do these things and then I don't have to worry about it. So he has the thought and somebody else might worry about it. They might be like me, like, when my daughter wanted to go somewhere on the weekend and take the car, I might worry she's driving a half hour away and something can happen, but I'm not creating a rule that's stopping her from doing it. And so then I just worry while she's gone and breathe easy when she gets back. And I actually used to with my oldest, I have 6 kids and now she has 4 kids, but with my oldest, I used to just pray the whole time. Even when she'd drive to school, I just pray while she was gone with the car that she'd make it home safely. Because we lived about 10 miles away from town when she was in high school. And it wasn't like, kind of like me when I was in high school. It wasn't like I thought she was going to do anything crazy. I just thought there's always a chance, So, and she, I think she'll admit this too. She has ADHD, so she might listen to this. Are you going to listen to this, sweetheart? But she wasn't a good driver when she first started driving. And I don't know, I think that's more common for kids today because they don't drive around as much as we used to. When I was younger, we had driver's ed in school, and this is in California. We had driver's ed in school. So by 15 and a half, we were in school driving and practicing. And maybe even at 15. And then when you're 15, at the end of that semester, whatever, you could do your test or whatever. But for me, my friends all turned 16 before I did. And so they taught me to drive on country roads and places that there weren't a lot of cars. A lot of people, I think when you live out in farmland and stuff, they learn to drive in people's fields and private roads. And so I knew how to drive. And when I went and did driver's ed and they had me get in the school car that was an automatic, I didn't know how to drive it because I only knew how to drive a stick. I thought, wait, I only use one foot here? What am I supposed to do with the other foot? So I still sometimes when I go to stop, I do the left foot first and the right foot to stop. But yeah, I think kids today, a lot of them don't get the experience of driving a stick shift. And a lot of them don't drive as early. And maybe that's a good thing. But I'm just adding that to it. So yeah, I don't think they have uncontrollable thoughts because they put those thoughts, they nip it in the bud. They just create something that makes it so that doesn't happen. And there's a lot of wisdom to that. And this is kind of funny. If you know anybody with OCPD or you suspect OCD, you might know this. So people with OCD often are bothered by their behaviors, like it's distressing them or their thoughts. They're thinking, this is a problem. I know this is a problem. Even if they can't control them, they know it's a problem. People with OCPD, they don't think it's a problem. They think there's a reason for it. There's an aim. There's a purpose. This is just making it so I can prevent the problem. And oh my goodness, yeah, I've heard that many times. So another interesting difference between OCD and OCPD is people with OCD tend to have a variance of how severe it is for them. and it has to do with their anxiety. So if their anxiety is greater, it's not like the worrisome thoughts are causing the anxiety or the behaviors are causing the anxiety. The anxiety is the underlying aspect. And when that anxiety grows, then those obsessive compulsive thoughts, obsessive or compulsive or both, thoughts and behavior rise. So it can go up and down. And the OCD actions and thoughts are a way of dealing with that anxiety, or the anxiety can help have that bubble up. It's an uncertainty in life, that fear grows, and then those thoughts can heighten. And so their symptoms might be less severe at certain times, and they might be more severe other times. If they're not having a lot of anxiety, if they're able to manage their anxiety, and I would imagine that's what a psychiatrist looks to do, is manage their anxiety, then the OCD thoughts and behavior aren't as great. But OCPD tends to be persistent and unchanging over the long term. Isn't that interesting? Unchanging. It doesn't fluctuate depending on anxiety, and it's present in almost every area of their life. And I would say that it can heighten. Again, I'm using this off of experience. And maybe there are some areas of life that it shows up more than others. My husband is convinced that as people get older, whatever traits they have that could be disruptive in life, it just grows. It's not getting better. It might get even a little severe. And that might be their brains get a little weaker. I don't know. Our bodies, who knows, in more pain. I don't know. My husband used to say my grandpa lived till 95, and my grandpa wasn't a grouchy person at all. He was fun, he was happy, and he looked healthy to me up until his last year. He looked like he was 75 to me up until his last year. But when we would go to restaurants, he would complain about stuff. He'd send a sandwich back. How can I eat this sandwich? The lettuce is wilted. He'd say things like that. And we'd say, Grandpa, and he'd go, well, I'm paying for this food. I should have good lettuce on my sandwich, or whatever he'd say, or this salad, he'd call this a salad. We go, Grandpa, but he was really friendly, but he'd say that, and then I don't know how he was friendly and got away with it. But my husband would say, well, old people get away with stuff like that. And he'd say, I can't wait till I'm older and I can just be grouchy like that. But yeah, maybe he was just using his I'm older, I can get away with this mode. I don't know, because he really could have eaten it. It wasn't like he was, fancy person that desired a lot. But that was probably the only flaw I ever saw in him, actually. There's so much else to cover when I start adding ADHD into the mix, because there can be people who have diagnoses, dual diagnoses with ADHD and OCD. It's not as common as just having ADHD, but that's something to talk about. And then also just hyper focus, hyper fixation, perfectionism, all these parts of ADHD that can be similar. There's a lot of deep diving here. It's funny because I said at the beginning, I didn't want to get so curious that I just wanted to go deeper and deeper. And that's what I need to do. That's what I need to do. So we're going to go deeper into this and not just kind of end it. This will be a part 1. And I'll talk a lot more about ADHD, the overlaps, the differences with OCD or OCPD in the part 2 episode. But just a few things that might just satisfy your curiosity, or you could look into it a little more in between episodes, is that there are some behaviors that are the same with OCD or ADHD or even OCPD, of having that order, creating that order, or doing things that look like they're making an environment what you need it to be. And I have so many opinions or ideas, I don't know if they're true, about why I like to have a closet really organized. The clutter makes it so I can't think as easily, as clearly, and it makes it harder to be on time. It messes up with a system that's streamlined. I can't function as well. I go in and I'm distracted by the clutter, that kind of thing. But I also know that I love to create order. I love to spend however many hours cleaning a closet if I can get myself to do it. And I've always felt like it was calming to me. So if you took an example where somebody was doing something like setting up a system so that all their silverware were in the drawer perfectly or whatever it was, some new ordered system, the difference between OCD, OCPD, and ADHD could just be the motivation and the reasoning for doing that. So somebody that is coming up with a new system for their silverware, their knives, that kind of thing. If it was somebody with OCPD, it might be because they thought these knives and forks are in a place where kids could get them and they can get hurt. And so they're worried about some outcome of disaster and they need control over it. Or they don't want this to scratch that, or they don't want this to get ruined or this to break. So they're changing the order to take care of what could be a worry, or it could just be, I'm going to childproof this. I'm going to do whatever it is to make it safer. And that is their reason for doing it. But somebody with OCD, if they're arranging objects a certain number of times or in a certain order, if they see something that's out of order, they are experiencing anxiety, and seeing something that's disordered often gives them greater discomfort and greater anxiety. And so if they see books or papers or things like that, it's giving them anxiety. It's not like when you have ADHD and it's just making you not be able to think as clearly. It might be making it a little harder to have that executive function that we already have an issue with. It can add to that by making you think of more things to do, or make you think of 5 more thoughts like, oh, I lost this in here the other day. I wonder if I can find it. It can just be a major distraction not to have order. So there's different reasons for wanting that order. You have a similar behavior, and the OCD behavior is probably different, but they still have a need for order. And the ADHD, another reason for wanting to organize or to do that is that when you hyperfocus, you're hyperfixating on something and you're taking your brain that has lower levels of dopamine and you're stimulating that. You're helping it raise the dopamine, and you're able to just go with that mode, go with that. I'm just going to work on this. I'm just going to keep doing this. And to me, even though it's technically a stimulating experience, it's calming to me because I'm not trying to think of something else that I need to do. I'm not trying to make a decision like that. I just get into that mode and it's like I'm ice skating all of a sudden. And it feels like, oh, this is nice. I don't have to do anything else but just keep doing this. It feels good and I'm creating order. I'm doing something wonderful. So it's interesting because all 3 of those disorders, they're all disorders, but ADHD is a neurodivergency disorder. So it's a way that the brain functions that causes that. The brain is also functioning in a different way, but it wasn't a way that the brain developed. The brain is functioning differently. It's all very fascinating, but there's different reasons. And maybe I wasn't very clear because, I tend to be scattered sometimes, but maybe I wasn't very clear, but there's 3 different motivations, 3 different reasons, 3 different purposes that doing something similar can serve. And there are overlaps that if you do have some obsessive behaviors or you have perfectionism, and in part 2 of this deep dive, I'll go into that more and hopefully have it make sense for all of us. But thank you for being here. I am happy that you are listening. And if you didn't listen to the last episode, I actually just recorded that last night. It was a nighttime episode, a PMS episode, which maybe doesn't make sense. But one of my ideas was, even before I decided to talk about sleep and calming methods and ways that you can fall asleep and calm your mind, that one of my ideas was to actually create an episode where I just talk about something that you could fall asleep to while you're trying to take a nap or go to sleep at night, or you wake up during the night and you think, oh, Renee has that one hour episode. I can just put that on. She's not even going to play music at the end that could wake me up. And it just ends. And then your phone turns off and you're already asleep. But I fall asleep so easily to calming voices. And hopefully my voice is calming. Some people's just aren't. And it's interesting because there are yoga teachers that are amazing yoga teachers. They understand alignment and anatomy and can do all these advanced poses. And then you go into their class and their voices just have a higher pitch or a punch to it. I don't even know, a nasaliness to it. There are some voices that just aren't relaxing. And that's just not their gift that goes along with their yoga teaching. And then there are some teachers, and I have a list of maybe 4 that I've done yoga with, one just on video. His name's Eric Schiffman, and he doesn't make, people don't buy videos anymore, and I don't even think he teaches in person anymore. But his voice, it can just make you melt like butter. It's just so soothing. And then 2 of my friends, Elizabeth Howard, she teaches yoga, I think sometimes still in Santa Cruz, and my friend Shannon McQuaid. They both have really relaxing voices. I'm trying to think of any other yoga teachers I know, and I know a ton. Santa Cruz had a cajillion yoga teachers. They had, I think, 23, 24 yoga studios when I moved there in 2010. COVID changed that a little bit. And so I've done yoga with a lot of teachers, but those 2 teachers that are friends of mine just have really calming voices. And I've been told that I have a calming voice, and I didn't aim to do that at all. But I thought, since people have told me that, maybe I could be a calming voice for you in your podcast library. You could save it, have it ready, take it with you, fall asleep. And I didn't mention this last night, but I have a few episodes that I've fallen asleep to that I've listened to probably dozens of times. And so it starts out, I know like a cat's going to come in at some point and meow, and they're going to call the cat's name and stuff like that. I know what's happening. I'm not learning much more, but it gets me to sleep. It's like hearing the same lullaby at night, I guess. It gets me to sleep. So I'm curious if it ends up working for you. It's yesterday's episode 39 about sleep strategies. So what do you know? I talked about sleep while helping you fall asleep. But this is going to be it for now. I'm almost reaching that hour mark today. Not quite. I'm not going to try to go that far. But thank you so much for being here. And I will be back next week. Bye. Open windows, broken shadows. Frozen dreams are left for tomorrow. Without a cause, no time for a pause. Rewind, I've run out of time to sing melodies and harmonies. I'm cut short. The silence of sound has yet been found, but not by me.